I want you to imagine that you wake up in the morning, you make your coffee, maybe this is your normal routine, you have something to eat for breakfast, and then you look at the news. Some of you, that's probably the first thing you do in the morning. Not always the best way to start your day, though, right? You sit there and you look at the news, but this day you see something that shocks you. You see something that's like a lead weight inside of you, because right there in front of you, right in front of your own eyes, in that news, is your own obituary. How would you feel about that? Would that be scary? Would that be shocking, confusing? Would you want to know what it says? Right? Would you want to know what people thought about you after they thought you'd prematurely died? No? Would you be curious? I mean, I'd be curious, right? Or would you be too shocked to process it? I have an amazing story to tell you about Alfred Nobel, who was a man who saw his own obituary in the newspaper one morning, and it changed his life. The third of 8 children, Alfred was born into poverty, or relatively speaking, in the metropolis of Stockholm, Sweden in 1833. His father was a brilliant but generally unsuccessful inventor and engineer, and little Alfred grew up surrounded by complicated tools, arcane chemical compounds, and all the equipment of a functioning laboratory. From a young age, Alfred began to experiment in his father's workshop, mixing a little bit of this and a little bit of that to create something that was new and exciting, sometimes literally exciting and explosive. From a young age, he liked things that went boom, and so apparently did his father, because by the late 1830s, the family had finally found a job that would pay their bills, which was manufacturing arms and armaments and explosives for the warring European powers that were always on the brink of one major offensive or another. When the Crimean War broke out in the 1850s, the Nobel family made a considerable sum of money by supplying the military with the latest in mid-19th century weapons of war. But when the conflict ended, their business disappeared overnight, which led to yet one more bankruptcy and another string of family failures. But Alfred tried to find a different path. He was a chemist by both training and trade, and he tried to focus on ways to make explosives safer, especially after an accidental explosion at one of the family factories killed 5 people, including his younger brother. Alfred would go on to make significant contributions to science and engineering, inventing a new kind of detonator, designing the blasting cap, and most famously, inventing dynamite in 1867. But despite his good intentions, and I think he did have good intentions, Alfred found that his family name was always associated with war and with conflict. In 1888, the death of his older brother confused some newspaper editors who ran an obituary for Alfred himself, saying that he had died. And so Alfred woke up one morning in Paris and read a headline in a newspaper that said, "The merchant of death is dead." It went on to read, "Alfred Nobel, who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday." And when he read this, it hit him right between the eyes. It's like his whole life changed. I mean, can you imagine what that would be like? To have your whole legacy, your whole life just distilled down to something like that? It galvanized him. It changed him. It lit a fire inside him. Was that what the world was going to think of him? A merchant of death? Was that his legacy that he was going to leave to the future? Was that what people were going to remember about him? Artillery and ammunition, explosives and extremism? Alfred swore that day that he would do something to change that story. And in 1895, he signed a last will and testament that gave away 94% of all of his wealth and possessions to create a series of prizes for achievements in science and global peace without regard to nationality. The prizes in chemistry, literature, peace, physics, and medicine were first awarded in 1901 and are generally considered to be the most prestigious awards in their respective fields. Today, when you hear the name Nobel, almost nobody thinks of the merchant of death, the man who was vilified by the press in his own time. Instead, for us, it conjures up great achievements in science and the betterment of humanity. Alfred Nobel conquered his own legacy. He changed the narrative about his own life, and he proved what was really important to him. We are defined in so many ways by our legacy, aren't we? The things we've done, the things we left undone. People remember our deeds or our lack of them. You know, if we achieve something monumental, we'll be remembered for it. If we fail to achieve something, we'll be remembered for that failure. The question becomes, what image do we bear on us? What mark will we be remembered for? How do our lives stack up in the balance? You know, in the gospel today, we have this incredible interchange between Jesus and the Pharisees, those people who were the legally minded religious scholars of the day who hoped to lure Jesus into giving the wrong answer to a very important question. They wanted him to say something that would offend either his Jewish following or the Roman authorities, and what better subject than taxes, right? How little have things changed in 2,000 years? Taxes are the thing that are going to get people worked up one way or the other, no matter what. There's more than a bit of our own gotcha journalism, I think, in this interchange that Jesus has with the Pharisees, because there's this hope that he's going to say something will incriminate himself one way or the other, something foolish, something ill-timed. So Jesus, they ask, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Now, the problem is that if Jesus said, yes, it's lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, he would have angered many of his Jewish followers, the population around him, the people that resented Roman rule with every fiber of their being. Those hated Roman legions that were parked literally above the temple, looking out over the temple in Jerusalem from a watchtower, were just the latest in a string of outsiders who had asserted military and political control over the region over many centuries. And that Roman eagle that marched in front of them, the sign of the long arm of Caesar, was a painful and daily reminder of the sons and daughters who had been lost century after century, dying at the sword of foreign occupiers and working under the whip of foreign masters. And so the question of the tax was a very loaded question, more loaded than we can probably even imagine. It was a question that seethed with anger and resentment just below the surface. Jesus couldn't just say yes and ignore the freedom of his own people, but he couldn't just say no either, because to do that would be to deny the authority of the emperor himself, of Rome itself, face allegations of treason that were punishable by death. And so the Pharisees, you see, had laid a very clever trap for Jesus. And they knew that either way he answered, he would be in deep, deep trouble. And so I kind of imagine Jesus looking them down, knowing what's in their heart. He gets a scowl on his face as he stares them down. He calls them hypocrites too, by the way. He sees those violent intentions in their heart. But Jesus also uses this opportunity to teach an amazing and powerful lesson because he shows them the coin bears the image of Caesar Augustus. What is that coin? It's a denarius. It's a coin of the Roman Empire. It's the currency of the realm. It has Caesar's image burned right onto it. It's issued at the decree of Caesar, and it flows back to Caesar in taxes. And you know, every time there was a new emperor, there was a new face on that coin to show who controlled the power, the money, the influence, the currency of the realm. It has Caesar's image on the face, and so give it to Caesar, Jesus says. But Jesus intones, but we must give to God the things that are God's. Give to God that thing which bears God's image. Now, just think about that for a moment. Think about that answer for just a second and unpack it a little bit in your mind. The coin had the image of a Roman emperor. But what, I ask you, has the image of God? What thing do we know bears the image of God? What thing would the Pharisees have known has the image of God right on it? You do, folks. We do. We are, all of us, made in God's image. The disciples are made in the image of God. The Pharisees are made in the image of God. The Sadducees and the temple priests, believe it or not, are made in the image of God. They carry nothing less than the image of God upon them. Give that coin to Caesar, Jesus tells them, but give nothing less than yourself, your whole self, your total being to God. The Pharisees are there with their traps and their hypocrisy and their will to see Jesus run afoul of one group or the other. But they leave amazed, tails between their legs, because Christ has reminded them of who they are, of what kind of people they are called to be. Not merely a people of a Hebrew tribe, not just people who are citizens of the Roman province of Judea, not just people who teach and work and minister in the temple. No, they are called to be the people of God. Like all the other members of the human race who live with the mark of God, their Creator, upon them. Caesar created that coin, Jesus says, but God created you. Give to God what is God's possession. Please understand, Jesus is not saying that less is owed to God. He's saying that everything is owed to God. Our very selves, our hearts and souls bear the image of God, are created in the image of God, and therefore belong to God more than any silver coin has belonged to any emperor. Caesar wants the coin. God wants nothing less than our whole selves, our souls and bodies. All that we are and all that we can be. We are, as St. Paul would later put it, living sacrifices. Alfred Nobel was a man who did probably more than anyone has ever done in their lifetime to try and rehabilitate his legacy, his public image, the way in which people saw him, and do something different. And I think it raises an interesting question about what legacy do we leave behind? What mark will be left of us? Each of us, both as Christians and as human beings, struggles with the question of what we will leave behind when we're gone. What will we be known for? Will we be known by everyone for having the biggest house in the neighborhood? Having the company that did the best quarterly sales this season? Will we be known for having the nicest car? Or will we be known for something good we've done, for some love that we've shown to our fellow human beings? Will we be known for bearing the mark of Jesus Christ? The very fact of Jesus' incarnation as a human being, the very fact of his life and death among us recalls the image of God that we bear, the Creator who made us and formed us in his image. It means that even in this life, with all of its trouble and tribulation, its misery and pain sometimes, the image of God has been laid on us, engraved upon us as surely as a mark on a silver coin. Remember that. Remember that. Remember who you are, Jesus says to the Pharisees. Remember, you hypocrites, you sinners, you broken and lost people, remember who you are. Remember, Jesus says to us. Remember, you drunks and you fools and you sinners, you blasphemers. Remember that you are made in the image of God. Give back to God that which he has made and loves, your own precious heart. That is a legacy greater than any prize. Holy Lord, you have made us in your image, and you have called us to your loving purpose and to the healing and reconciliation of this world. Breathe your Spirit upon us and your whole earth, that we may be known as your disciples by the love we share to each other and the world. In your holy name, amen.